Trenton Huxley stepped briskly into the cavernous terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, his mind already occupied with the minutiae of his next business deal. As the self-made billionaire CEO of Huxley Innovations, he was known for his relentless focus and an almost obsessive dedication to efficiency. Every morning, he donned his tailored charcoal suit and slicked back hair with an air of quiet determination, convinced that emotions were luxuries he could ill afford. Today, however, fate had other plans. The terminal buzzed with the constant hum of rolling suitcases, intercom announcements, and a diverse tapestry of travelers hurrying to and fro. Lost in thought, Trenton navigated the crowded concourse with his eyes fixed on the digital departure board, mentally rehearsing his pitch for a high-stakes merger meeting. In the midst of this organized chaos, he was suddenly jolted by an unexpected collision. Before he could fully process the moment, his arm swung out instinctively, wrapping around a woman who had appeared in his path as if from nowhere. For an instant, time seemed to suspend. Trenton's heart thumped erratically, a sensation he had long learned to ignore, and as he pulled his arm back, he found himself staring into the eyes of the stranger. Her eyes were a striking shade of blue, bright and curious, framed by wisps of soft chestnut hair that cascaded casually over her shoulders. The shock on her face was palpable, but it was quickly replaced by an amused smile, as if she found the entire scenario absurdly charming. "I'm terribly sorry," Trenton stammered, his usual polished tone faltering in the wake of his embarrassment. "I didn't see you there, I thought you were someone else." His words, sincere yet awkward, hung in the air as he searched her face for any sign of anger, but instead he found only a glimmer of gentle humor. The woman tilted her head slightly, her smile widening in a way that disarmed him further. "No harm done," she replied softly, her voice warm and melodious, each word laced with a quiet, understated confidence. "I'm Avery Wynne." The simplicity of her introduction, combined with the ease in her demeanor, sent an unexpected ripple through Trenton's carefully constructed world. For a moment, he hesitated, unable to reconcile the rigid persona he wore with the sudden, inexplicable stir of genuine emotion. In that brief encounter, the relentless pursuit of profits and power seemed to pause, replaced by the softness of human connection. Trenton's mind raced as he recalled every detail of her face, the slight dimple at the corner of her left cheek, the way her eyes crinkled just so when she smiled, and he felt as though he were experiencing something profoundly transformative. As the crowd surged around them, Avery offered a playful shrug, as if to dismiss the gravity of the moment. "I guess airports are more interesting than I thought," she said, her tone light yet carrying an undertone of mystery. Trenton's heart pounded in a way it hadn't in years. He was a man who had built his empire on calculated risks and cold logic, yet here, in the midst of everyday chaos, a chance encounter had unraveled his defenses. After a brief exchange of apologies and a few hesitant smiles, the crowd began to pull them apart. Avery slipped away into the throng of travelers, leaving Trenton standing in the middle of the terminal, dazed and strangely elated. In the minutes that followed, as the intercom announced boarding for his flight, Trenton found himself unable to concentrate on anything except the memory of Avery's sparkling eyes and the way she had laughed, a sound that seemed to echo with the promise of something unknown. He clutched his phone tightly, as if holding on to the fragile hope that this was not a mere fleeting mishap, but the beginning of something life-changing. Back in the sterile solitude of his private jet, Trenton sat in silence, staring out the window at the receding airport. The vast expanse of clouds and sky did little to dispel the warmth that had ignited within him. For the first time in years, his thoughts were not dominated by mergers, stock prices, or quarterly earnings. Instead, they were filled with the unbidden question: who was Avery Wynne? Was she simply an unexpected interruption, or had fate chosen her to be the catalyst for a transformation he had never dared to imagine? That night, as the jet soared into the dark sky above, Trenton's mind churned with restless possibilities. He replayed the encounter over and over, the accidental embrace, her soft apology, the spark of connection in her eyes. Every detail was etched in his memory, contrasting sharply with the clinical detachment he maintained in every aspect of his life. In that moment, the man who had once believed that love was a dangerous distraction felt an unfamiliar pull, a longing to discover something genuine, something that transcended the relentless pursuit of wealth. Determined to find Avery again, Trenton made a silent vow. He would divert a future business trip to Atlanta, take the risk of stepping outside his meticulously controlled existence, and search for the woman who had, in one accidental moment, unraveled the fortress of his guarded heart. As the private jet continued its journey into the night, Trenton leaned back in his seat, a mixture of hope and trepidation swirling within him. In the vast darkness outside, punctuated only by the distant glow of city lights, he allowed himself to wonder if that one fleeting encounter was the start of a new chapter, a chapter where he could finally embrace vulnerability and let true love in, even if it meant risking everything he had built. And so, as the plane ascended higher into the night sky, Trenton Blackwood felt a shift in his soul, a quiet, persistent stirring that promised that, in the unpredictable tapestry of life, sometimes the most accidental of moments could change everything. Trenton Blackwood spent the rest of that fateful day in a haze of restless determination. Even as he boarded his private jet and settled into his customary routine of high-level conference calls and meticulously planned strategy sessions, his thoughts kept straying back to Avery Wynne. The image of her gentle eyes and the playful warmth of her smile were etched in his mind, a stark contrast to the cold logic of his corporate life. In the quiet solitude of his jet, with the vast Atlantic below and the hum of engines in his ears, he found himself drafting plans not for mergers or acquisitions, but for a search, a mission to find the elusive woman who had disrupted his carefully constructed world. Unable to concentrate on anything else, Trenton summoned his trusted assistant, Darian, and issued a command that was as unusual as it was urgent: "I need every piece of information on Avery Wynne. Start with the airport records, social media channels, and any local event listings in Atlanta. She must have some trace." Darian, accustomed to Trenton's exacting demands, set to work immediately, his fingers flying over his keyboard as he sifted through digital data. Trenton's eyes remained fixed on the receding view from the jet's window, where clouds drifted in an endless sea of white, yet his mind was a storm of questions and possibilities. Who was Avery Wynne? What was her story? And more importantly, how could fate have led their paths to cross in such an unexpected, intimate moment? That night, in the quiet darkness of his penthouse high above Manhattan, Trenton pored over every scrap of information Darian managed to gather. There were only fleeting hints, a mention on an obscure lifestyle blog, a photograph in a local arts magazine, and a brief note in a community newsletter referencing a rising creative with an unmistakable name. Each clue was as elusive as a whisper, yet it fueled his growing obsession. The more he delved into the digital archives, the more he became convinced that Avery was not merely a random occurrence but a sign that something in his life was shifting. For years, he had guarded his heart with cold calculation, believing that love was a distraction too perilous to risk his empire. Now, that accidental embrace had awakened a yearning he could no longer ignore, a desire to break free from his self-imposed isolation. The next day, Trenton made a decision that surprised even himself. He diverted a scheduled business trip back to Atlanta, choosing instead to personally return to the airport terminal where it all began. Standing once again among the throng of travelers, he scanned the crowd with a mix of hope and anxiety. Every face was a potential Avery, every movement a possible clue. His pulse raced as he recalled the exact moment, the softness of her apology, the fleeting look in her eyes, and he was determined that this time, he would not let her vanish into the anonymity of the crowd. As hours passed in the busy terminal, Trenton questioned airport staff, discreetly inquiring if anyone remembered a woman by that name, or if security footage might offer any further hints. Though the responses were polite, they provided little comfort, leaving him with only scattered leads and a persistent, gnawing need to find her. He made mental notes of potential places she might frequent: cafes in Atlanta known for their bohemian charm, local art galleries where creative souls often gathered, and vowed to visit each one until he uncovered the mystery of Avery Wynne. Late in the evening, after a particularly fruitless search and a lingering sense of both frustration and hope, Trenton returned to his hotel room, his mind abuzz with plans for the next day. In the solitude of his room, illuminated only by the soft glow of city lights filtering through the window, he reviewed every detail of that accidental embrace. He replayed the scene over and over, as if trying to catch even the smallest hint of her personality, a nuance in the curve of her smile, the warmth behind her eyes, the way she had carried herself with quiet dignity amid the chaos of the airport. With each recollection, his resolve strengthened. He realized that the encounter was more than a fleeting mistake, it was a turning point, a call from fate urging him to reclaim a part of himself he had long suppressed. Before drifting off to sleep that night, Trenton scribbled a few lines in his journal, a private confession of the strange new emotions that had taken root in his heart. "I must find Avery Wynne," he wrote, his handwriting bold and unsteady. "For the first time in years, I feel that love might not be the enemy I once believed it to be. Instead, it could be the key to unlocking a life richer in meaning and connection." The words, raw and resolute, echoed through the silence of his room, marking the beginning of a journey that promised to challenge everything he had built. And so, as the city of Atlanta awaited him with its hidden corners and untold stories, Trenton Blackwood resolved to embrace the uncertainty. The quest for Avery Wynne was now not merely about chasing an elusive stranger, but about rediscovering a part of himself that had been locked away for far too long, a part that was ready to risk everything for the chance at true, transformative love. Trenton Blackwood's quest for Avery Wynne reached a fever pitch the day he landed in New York for his covert return to Atlanta. Determined to follow up on the elusive clues his assistant had uncovered, he found himself wandering through the eclectic streets of Soho, a neighborhood known for its vibrant art scene and bohemian charm. The neon-lit sidewalks and the murmur of creative souls filled the air with an energy that was utterly alien to the sterile precision of his corporate world. As he walked, every passerby, every flicker of light, seemed to whisper possibilities, urging him onward. That evening, Trenton attended an intimate art exhibition at a converted warehouse gallery, a venue pulsing with raw creativity and unpredictable expression. The space was alive with the vibrant chatter of artists and the scent of fresh paint mingling with the subtle aroma of coffee from a nearby vendor. Trenton moved through the crowd with cautious anticipation, his eyes scanning each face for the one that had so unexpectedly captured his heart at the airport. It wasn't long before he saw her. Amid a cluster of abstract canvases, Avery stood quietly observing a series of evocative paintings. Her presence was understated yet magnetic. She wore a soft cream blouse paired with vintage denim, and her auburn hair cascaded freely over her shoulders, catching the ambient light with every graceful movement. In that moment, the noise of the gallery receded into a hushed backdrop, and Trenton's heart began to race with hope and trepidation. "Excuse me," he said as he approached, his voice a mixture of determination and vulnerability that he had rarely shown in public. Avery turned slowly, her clear blue eyes widening in cautious recognition as she met his gaze. For a long, suspended moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, a tentative smile tugged at her lips. "Trenton?" she asked softly, as if testing whether the reunion was real. "Yes," he replied, barely able to believe that fate had reunited them under such serendipitous circumstances. I've been looking for you." His words, simple and unadorned, carried the weight of countless restless hours and an inner longing that had grown too strong to ignore. Avery's smile deepened, and she gestured toward a quieter corner of the gallery where a small seating area offered some privacy. "I wasn't sure I'd see you again," she murmured as they settled onto a worn leather sofa. The gallery's soft lighting bathed them in a gentle glow, creating an almost surreal atmosphere where art and emotion intertwined. They began with cautious conversation, exchanging pleasantries about the exhibition and the unpredictable nature of life that had apparently brought them together once more. As the evening progressed, the discussion deepened. Trenton confessed how the accidental embrace at the airport had haunted him since that fateful day, a moment that had shattered his long-held vow of emotional detachment. "I thought I was impervious," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But the moment I saw you, something inside me just shifted. I couldn't let that feeling go." Avery listened intently, her eyes softening with understanding. I always believed that even the smallest encounters could change our lives, she said, her tone gentle but laced with a hint of defiant hope. I never expected to be recognized by someone from my past, or to feel such a connection with a man whose world is so different from mine. In that intimate setting, surrounded by provocative art and the quiet hum of creativity, the barriers between them began to dissolve. They traded stories of their past. Avery spoke of her humble beginnings in a small coastal town and the struggle to find her voice as an artist, while Trenton revealed how the loss of a cherished relationship had driven him to build his empire on a foundation of cold logic and guarded ambition. Their confessions, each laden with personal pain and hidden dreams, wove a delicate tapestry of shared vulnerability and possibility. By the end of the evening, as the gallery's lights dimmed and guests began to filter out into the cool night air, Trenton and Avery lingered in the quiet solitude of that secluded corner. Neither wanted the conversation to end, each felt that this reunion was not a fleeting moment but a turning point in their lives. They exchanged contact information, promising to meet again soon in a place where they could explore the intricate layers of their past and the potential for a future together. As Trenton stepped out into the bustling streets of Soho, his mind swirled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. The accidental embrace at the airport had ignited a spark, and tonight, amid art, soft music, and whispered confessions, that spark had grown into a promise that perhaps his rigid world of business and detachment could give way to the unpredictable, transformative power of love. And as the neon lights flickered overhead, Trenton resolved that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would chase this chance at connection, willing to risk everything for the possibility of a life filled with genuine emotion. After the exhibition, Trenton and Avery slipped out into the cool night air, leaving behind the soft murmur of art enthusiasts and the lingering glow of gallery lights. They walked side by side along a quiet, lamplit street in Soho, the city's usual clamor reduced to a gentle hum. The accidental collision at the airport and the serendipitous reunion at the gallery had given way to a tentative, yet palpable, intimacy, and now, in the reflective quiet of the night, they both sensed it was time to share the secrets that had long been buried. Avery led them into a small, unassuming café tucked away on a side street, a refuge from the relentless pace of the city. Inside, the space was intimate, with vintage posters adorning the walls and a soft jazz melody playing from a corner speaker. They chose a secluded booth near a window where the streetlights cast a warm glow on their faces, softening the edges of their guarded expressions. Over steaming cups of herbal tea, Trenton began hesitantly. "Avery, I've spent so many years building walls around my heart," he said, his voice low and laced with vulnerability. "I always believed that keeping emotions at bay was the key to success, that love was a distraction. But when I accidentally hugged you at the airport, something in me shifted. It was as if, for one brief moment, I felt real." His gaze dropped to his hands, which trembled ever so slightly on the table. Avery reached across and gently covered his hand with her own. "I understand," she murmured, her eyes soft with empathy. "I've had my own share of battles with vulnerability. I used to hide behind my art, convincing myself that beauty could mend all wounds, even if it meant never truly letting anyone in. But sometimes, the things we fear most are the very things that can set us free." Her words, quiet but steady, seemed to resonate deeply with Trenton. For a long moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the only sound the soft clink of cups and the gentle background jazz. Then Trenton continued, his tone growing more earnest. "I was raised to think that success was measured solely by profit margins and strategic moves. I never allowed myself to care, until now. I'm beginning to see that the fortress I built around me isn't protection at all, it's a prison. And maybe, just maybe, it's time I break free." His eyes lifted to meet hers, and in that gaze there was a raw honesty that startled both of them. Avery's smile was bittersweet. "I used to think that art was the only language of the soul I could understand, because it was free of expectations," she admitted softly. "But meeting you, it made me realize that sometimes, sharing our true selves, even with all the risks, is the most beautiful form of expression." She paused, glancing out the window where the city lights shimmered like scattered promises. I've always been afraid that if I let someone in, I'd be hurt again. But I wonder if, in the process, I might also find a piece of myself that I've been missing all these years. The intimacy of their conversation deepened as they spoke of lost loves and the quiet scars of the past. Trenton recalled the loneliness that had haunted him in the sterile silence of boardrooms, the empty accolades that had done nothing to fill the void of isolation. Avery shared memories of a once bright romance that had been shattered by betrayal, leaving her with the resolve to create her own path in the world of art and design. Their voices intertwined, forming a delicate tapestry of shared regrets and hopeful aspirations. As the evening wore on, the soft glow of the cafe's vintage lamp seemed to illuminate not just the space, but the unspoken possibilities between them. Trenton reached into his jacket pocket and, with a hesitant smile, produced a small, folded piece of paper. "I wrote something once," he confessed, "back when I thought I'd never let anyone see behind my armor." He unfolded the paper and began reading quietly, the words spilling out like confessions from a past life. His poem spoke of loneliness, of nights spent in the glow of city lights while the world around him celebrated life, and of a sudden, unexpected warmth that had transformed his entire existence. Avery listened, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as the raw vulnerability in his words broke through the barriers he had maintained for so long. When he finished, a heavy silence fell between them, a silence that was at once painful and profoundly healing. "Thank you for sharing that with me," Avery said softly, her hand gently resting on his. "It means more than you can imagine." Outside, the rain began to fall in a soft, steady rhythm, each drop a reminder that sometimes even the most carefully constructed lives can be washed clean by the honesty of a single, vulnerable moment. In that quiet, secluded cafe, with the warmth of shared confessions enveloping them, Trenton and Avery discovered that the path to true connection was paved with risks and uncertainties, but also with the promise of redemption and the transformative power of love. By the time they finally stepped out into the cool night air, they did so with a renewed sense of purpose. They knew that this conversation, rich with hidden truths and long-held regrets, was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything they had once believed about themselves. And as they walked together beneath the softly falling rain, hand in hand, the city around them seemed to whisper that even the most guarded hearts could find solace, and maybe, just maybe, learn to love again. Later that evening, as the neon glow of New York's Soho district began to blend with the encroaching dusk, Soren found himself and Marigold wandering into a quiet, hidden speakeasy tucked away behind an unmarked door. The air inside was thick with the scent of aged bourbon and soft jazz notes that flowed like whispered secrets. They chose a secluded booth in the back, away from the boisterous chatter of other patrons, and settled into a space that seemed to exist solely for their conversation. The intimacy of that dimly lit room provided the perfect backdrop for truths long suppressed. Over the course of their drinks, Soren's usually impenetrable facade began to crack. He spoke first of the burdens he had carried as a ruthless CEO, a man who had spent decades building his empire while keeping his heart locked away. "I used to believe that emotions were liabilities," he confessed, his voice low and trembling with sincerity. "I prided myself on being in control, that detachment was my armor. But meeting you, it's like that one accidental moment at the airport unlocked something I didn't know I was missing." His eyes, usually so guarded and calculating, shone with vulnerability, each word a small surrender of the walls he had meticulously built. Marigold listened, her gaze steady and empathetic. In her soft tone, she revealed pieces of her own past, the quiet battles she had fought to overcome heartbreak in a world that often demanded she hide her true, tender self. "I spent years convincing myself that art and solitude were enough to heal the scars," she said, her fingers tracing idle patterns on the tablecloth. "But sometimes, the very things we try to avoid are what make us whole. I've learned that love isn't a distraction, it's the force that transforms us." Her words, gentle yet resolute, seemed to hang in the air like fragile glass, each syllable refracting light onto the hidden corners of Soren's soul. As the night deepened, their conversation turned from painful confessions to tentative dreams of what might be. They talked about the possibility of a future where Soren could merge his corporate acumen with a genuine commitment to making a positive impact on the world, a future where his business could serve as a platform for compassion rather than cold calculation. Marigold's eyes lit up as she described her vision for community-based art initiatives that would inspire and uplift those who had been forgotten by society. In that moment, Soren began to see beyond the world of numbers and deals. He started to imagine a life where the risks of vulnerability were outweighed by the beauty of connection. But as the soft strains of the live piano mingled with the murmurs of distant conversations, a subtle tension crept into the space between them. Soren's expression shifted, and he paused before asking, "Have you ever wondered if our past mistakes, everything we've built to protect ourselves, might actually be the keys to a better future?" His question was not rhetorical, it was laden with both fear and hope. Marigold's eyes softened, and after a thoughtful silence, she replied, "I think our scars make us who we are. They remind us of what we've survived and what we're capable of overcoming. Sometimes, the greatest risks lead to the most profound rewards." Encouraged by her words, Soren leaned in closer, his hand reaching out to gently cover hers across the table. "I'm tired of living in a fortress of solitude," he admitted. "Every day, I remind myself that I must remain detached, that allowing myself to love is a weakness. But with you, I feel alive. I feel as though all the walls I built have begun to crumble." His voice was thick with emotion, a stark contrast to the cold efficiency he once embodied. Marigold's smile was both tender and daring as she squeezed his hand. "Then let's risk it all," she whispered. "Let's embrace everything, our past, our pain, and the possibility of a future that defies the rules we once thought were unbreakable." The air between them buzzed with the promise of a connection that was as exhilarating as it was uncertain. For hours, they sat there, sharing laughter, tears, and dreams in equal measure. The world outside faded into a distant memory as they became lost in each other's eyes, unburdening their souls with stories of regret and hope. Each word, each touch, was a step toward dismantling the barriers they had both so desperately clung to for protection. It was a night of reckoning, a night in which both realized that the true risk was not in falling in love, but in never allowing themselves to feel at all. When the final call for last orders sounded and the soft lights of the speakeasy began to dim, they reluctantly rose, aware that the magic of the night was ephemeral. Outside, the cool air and the neon reflections of the city awaited them, a reminder that the real world was full of challenges and uncertainties. Yet as they stepped out into that urban night, hand in hand, they carried with them the quiet assurance that they had taken the first courageous step toward a life defined not by isolation and calculation, but by genuine, transformative love. In the silence of the midnight streets, as the city pulsed with endless possibilities, Soren and Marigold vowed silently to keep that spark alive, no matter what the future held. And as the night swallowed them into its embrace, they began to walk together toward a new dawn, one where their hearts, once guarded, now beat boldly in unison. Later that week, as autumn deepened into a crisp early winter, Trenton Blackwood found himself caught in the midst of a corporate maelstrom that threatened to unravel everything he had built. In the gleaming high-rise of Huxley Innovations, whispers began to circulate through the polished corridors. What had once been an isolated, personal encounter was now becoming fodder for boardroom speculation, and Trenton's accidental embrace with Avery had ignited more than a private fascination, it had become a symbol of his vulnerability. On a gray morning that felt unusually heavy, Trenton stepped into a conference room filled with key board members and senior investors. The room was a study in austerity, long, dark wood tables, stern faces, and the hum of a projector cycling through quarterly reports. As he took his seat at the head of the table, a palpable tension filled the air. Murmurs of concern drifted among the directors as they reviewed recent internal communications and subtle changes in Trenton's decision-making style. Some questioned whether his personal distraction, a growing preoccupation with Avery's unexpected warmth and kindness, had begun to affect the ruthless efficiency that had become his trademark. A seasoned director, Marcus Ellison, leaned forward with a measured tone. "Mr. Blackwood, we have noticed a deviation from your usual strategic focus," he said. There are indications that your recent actions may have been influenced by personal factors, and we must ask, are you still able to lead this company without compromise? His question, although wrapped in corporate formality, carried an undercurrent of disapproval that cut sharply through the room. Trenton's jaw tightened as he absorbed the challenge. The words reminded him of the walls he had built, walls that had now begun to crumble in the wake of that fateful encounter at the airport. For several long minutes, the room fell into an uneasy silence as Trenton gathered his thoughts. His mind flashed back to Avery's gentle eyes and the unexpected tenderness of her smile, a softness that had pierced the armor of his carefully controlled life. With a slow, deliberate exhale, he responded, "My personal journey has evolved," he began, his voice measured but tinged with raw honesty. "For years, I believed that detachment was the only way to secure success. But I have come to realize that vulnerability, when managed with discipline and purpose, can be a source of strength rather than a liability." He paused, meeting the skeptical gazes around him. "The decisions I've made recently are not distractions from our mission, they are the result of embracing a more holistic approach to leadership, one that values empathy and authenticity alongside profit and growth." As his words resonated in the room, a few faces softened while others remained inscrutable. One investor, whose frown betrayed lingering doubts, interjected with a pointed question about the long-term implications of mixing personal evolution with corporate strategy. Trenton's eyes darkened briefly as he responded, "I understand your concerns. However, innovation is born from the courage to adapt. My experiences, both personal and professional, have shown me that true progress requires a willingness to break free from old, restrictive paradigms." His tone was firm, yet every word carried the weight of someone who had just risked exposing his innermost self. After the meeting adjourned, Trenton retreated to his private office on the top floor, a sanctuary of polished surfaces and quiet reflection. He sat alone at his massive desk, the city's lights twinkling through floor-to-ceiling windows. His mind churned with the aftermath of the boardroom confrontation. The murmurs of disapproval, the uncertainty in his colleagues' eyes, and the persistent buzz of scandal in the media all threatened to destabilize the empire he had spent decades building. Yet, amidst that turmoil, the memory of Avery's compassion and the genuine connection they had forged offered a glimmer of hope. Later that evening, as he reviewed financial reports in a state of introspection, a message from Avery arrived, a simple text that read, "I'm here if you need to talk." In that moment, Trenton felt the isolation he had once clung to begin to dissolve. Determined to integrate his personal transformation with his professional responsibilities, he resolved that the next step would be to openly address his new approach to leadership. Not as a concession, but as an evolution. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, skeptical board members, critical investors, and a media hungry for scandal, but he also believed that authenticity was the only path to lasting success. That night, as he sat by the window of his office and gazed out over the glittering expanse of the city, Trenton allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. He replayed every detail of his recent encounters with Avery, the accidental hug that had upended his routine, the serendipitous reunion at the art gallery, and the heartfelt conversation in the quiet corners of a hidden café. These moments, so different from his usual existence of calculated risk and emotional restraint, had ignited a yearning for a future where both his heart and his empire could flourish. In the solitude of that reflective night, Trenton drafted a plan, a new strategy for Huxley innovations that would incorporate his personal evolution. He envisioned a series of philanthropic initiatives, bold investments in social responsibility, and a commitment to fostering a corporate culture that celebrated both profitability and human connection. His handwritten notes were filled with ideas that challenged the very essence of his former self, a self that had once dismissed love as a distraction. Now, as he penned each thought, he felt the stirrings of a man reborn, ready to embrace a life where vulnerability was not a weakness but the cornerstone of transformative leadership. As the clock ticked late into the night, Trenton closed his journal and looked out at the awakening city, a quiet determination settling over him. He knew that the path ahead would be arduous, with both personal and professional battles to fight. But in that moment, bolstered by the memory of Avery's gentle support and his own newfound clarity, he resolved to face the future unafraid, willing to risk everything for the chance to live authentically, to lead with heart, and to let love transform him in ways he had never imagined. Late one rainy evening, as the city's neon reflections danced across rain-soaked sidewalks, Trenton Blackwood faced the ultimate test of his transformation. The whispers that had been swirling around his unexpected romance with Avery had finally exploded into open controversy. In the sterile glow of his high-rise boardroom at Huxley Innovations, key directors and investors gathered for an emergency meeting. The atmosphere was heavy, the usual crisp cadence of corporate presentations replaced by tense murmurs and wary glances. Rumors had evolved from vague suspicions to damning assertions, that Trenton's newfound emotional openness was clouding his judgment, that his personal entanglements were now jeopardizing the very foundation of his empire. As the meeting commenced, the stern voice of Marcus Ellison, one of the board's most influential members, cut through the silence. "Mr. Blackwood, recent events suggest a dramatic shift in your leadership style," he began, his tone measured yet laced with incredulity. "There are reports that your personal distractions, specifically, your close association with Avery, are affecting strategic decisions. Can you assure us that your heart has not compromised your head?" Trenton's pulse hammered in his ears as he surveyed the room. The faces before him, usually confident and unyielding, now seemed shadowed with doubt. For years, he had built his empire on an unwavering commitment to logic and detachment. Yet just months ago, a chance airport collision and a serendipitous reunion had upended that certainty, igniting a tender connection he never anticipated. Now, that very vulnerability was under siege. Swallowing hard, Trenton rose to address the board. "I understand your concerns," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "My approach has changed, and I won't deny that I've allowed myself to be affected by personal relationships. But I believe that true leadership isn't about suppressing emotion, it's about harnessing it to drive innovation and empathy. Our latest philanthropic initiative, which integrates sustainable business practices with community engagement, is a direct result of embracing that change." He paused, letting his words settle over the tense faces. "I am still the man who built this company, and I will continue to make decisions that are rooted in careful strategy and sound judgment. I ask you to trust that my evolution is a strength, not a liability." For a moment, the room was silent, punctuated only by the low hum of the overhead lights. Then, a board member's skeptical expression softened ever so slightly. "We will monitor the outcomes closely," Marcus replied, his tone cautious yet open to possibility. Despite lingering doubts, the board agreed to a provisional review period, allowing Trenton to prove that his personal transformation was enhancing rather than endangering his leadership. After the meeting, as the board members dispersed in subdued clusters, Trenton retreated to a private corner of his office. The rain continued to drum softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows, mirroring the steady rhythm of his troubled thoughts. He sat heavily in his leather chair, staring out at the glistening city, when his phone buzzed, a message from Avery. The text was simple: "I'm here. Always." The words, laden with warmth and reassurance, cut through the residual tension like a lifeline. In that quiet, solitary moment, Trenton allowed himself to reflect on the journey that had brought him to this precipice. He recalled the accidental airport embrace that had shattered his long-held vow, the restless nights spent searching for Avery, and the serendipitous reunion in Soho that had reawakened a part of him he thought was forever lost. He realized that vulnerability, though terrifying, had become the catalyst for a more authentic life, a life where the cold calculus of business could coexist with the messy, transformative power of love. Determined to weather the storm, Trenton drafted a detailed plan to not only salvage his corporate reputation but to integrate his personal evolution into the company's future. He envisioned launching a series of social initiatives that would be publicly attributed to a more empathetic, forward-thinking leadership style. Every data point, every strategic decision, would be reinforced by a commitment to values he now held dear. As he typed, his heart pounded with renewed determination. He wasn't just fighting for his company's success, he was fighting for the possibility of a life where love and duty were not mutually exclusive. That evening, after finalizing his proposals and sending them off to the board for review, Trenton met Avery in a quiet, understated cafe near his office. The soft lighting and gentle hum of conversation provided a stark contrast to the earlier tension. As they sat together, Avery reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I know this isn't easy," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his with unwavering support. "But you're not alone in this. We'll face whatever comes, together." Her words, filled with genuine compassion, wrapped around him like a promise. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Trenton allowed himself a small, hopeful smile. The betrayal, the doubts, the cold scrutiny of the board, all of it paled in comparison to the warmth of Avery's presence. In that shared moment, he knew that even if the road ahead was fraught with challenges, the risk of embracing love was a risk worth taking. As the night deepened and the city outside fell silent beneath a blanket of rain, Trenton and Avery stepped out into the cool air, ready to confront the future. The journey was just beginning, a future where the lines between personal passion and corporate ambition blurred into a tapestry of authenticity and transformation. And with each step they took, hand in hand, Trenton vowed to never again hide behind the cold armor of detachment. Instead, he would let his heart lead him, embracing the unpredictable beauty of love, even in the face of doubt and adversity. Late one winter morning, as a pale sun struggled to break through a blanket of heavy clouds over Manhattan, Trenton Blackwood stood on the balcony of his penthouse, his eyes fixed on the city's awakening. The past few weeks had been a maelstrom of public scrutiny, boardroom battles, and personal introspection. The scandal that had erupted from the leak, and the subsequent press conference where he had bared his vulnerabilities, had slowly begun to subside. Now, in the quiet solitude of that early hour, Trenton allowed himself to reflect on the transformation he had undergone. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Overnight, internal reports had confirmed that investor sentiment was shifting. The very transparency and authenticity that had once threatened to undermine his empire were now sparking a cautious admiration among many. It seemed that the public, and even some of his most hardened board members, had started to see the power of his evolution, a leader who dared to show his humanity while still driving his company forward. That morning, a meticulously prepared press release was issued, outlining a bold new initiative that would merge corporate innovation with genuine social responsibility. Trenton announced plans to launch a series of community outreach programs focused on mentoring underprivileged youth and supporting maternal and child health, a project that would serve as a living testament to his personal journey. The initiative was not just about damage control, it was a declaration that his heart and his empire could thrive side by side. As news outlets picked up the story, headlines began to shift from scandal to a narrative of redemption and transformation. After the press conference, Trenton invited Avery, his steadfast partner through the recent storm, to join him on the balcony. In the soft, diffuse light of the winter morning, they stood side by side, their breath visible in the cold air. The city below, usually an endless sea of sharp angles and neon brilliance, now appeared as a gentle mosaic of hope and possibility. Avery's eyes, steady and filled with compassion, met his. "Today, I saw a new side of you," she said softly. "Not the relentless titan I once thought I knew, but a man willing to risk everything for authenticity." Trenton took her hand, his voice heavy with both gratitude and resolve. "For too long, I built walls around my heart, convinced that vulnerability was a weakness," he confessed. "But now, I realize that those walls have isolated me from life itself. Embracing my imperfections, admitting my past mistakes, and allowing love in, this is not the downfall of my empire, it's the foundation for its rebirth." His words, spoken with trembling conviction, resonated deeply not only with Avery but also with the quiet city beyond. Over the following weeks, as the new initiative gathered momentum, Trenton worked tirelessly to integrate his personal transformation into the very fabric of his company's culture. He convened roundtable discussions with top executives, emphasizing that the new strategic direction was rooted in empathy, innovation, and a commitment to social good. Investors began to express cautious optimism as quarterly reports reflected steady growth coupled with a surge in public goodwill. Although not everyone was convinced, skeptics still whispered in hushed tones about the risks of mixing personal sentiment with business. The majority saw a leader who was not only adapting but also redefining success on his own terms. Meanwhile, Avery continued to be a pillar of support, her creative insights and unwavering belief in the power of vulnerability inspiring both Trenton and the teams working on the philanthropic projects. Together, they rolled out a series of community programs that spanned from scholarship funds to mentorship workshops, each initiative meticulously designed to bridge the gap between corporate prosperity and social impact. Public events, once orchestrated solely to dazzle investors, now featured heartwarming stories of lives transformed by the company's newfound commitment to social responsibility. One chilly evening, several months later, Trenton and Avery attended a charity gala in a refurbished historic building. As he walked on stage to receive an award for corporate innovation and social impact, Trenton's eyes sought out Avery in the crowd. In that instant, amid a flurry of applause and camera flashes, he realized that his journey from ruthless detachment to heartfelt transparency had become a powerful narrative, not just for his personal redemption, but as a beacon for others who believe that true leadership requires courage and compassion. After the gala, back on the balcony of his penthouse, Trenton and Avery stood together, their silhouettes outlined against the starlit skyline. The cool air carried with it the promise of a new dawn, a future unburdened by old vows and built on the courageous willingness to love and to lead. I've learned that the greatest risk is not in falling in love, but in never allowing yourself to feel at all, Trenton said, his voice echoing softly in the quiet night. Avery smiled, her eyes reflecting a shared hope that had blossomed through hardship and transformation. And every moment we risk, every scar we bear, paves the way for a future richer than any profit margin, she replied. In that tender, reflective moment, the past, with all its betrayals, fears, and cold calculations, became a stepping stone toward a future where true, transformative love could flourish. The journey ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, but together, Trenton and Avery were ready to face it. The man who had once believed that vulnerability was his downfall now stood tall, emboldened by the truth that opening one's heart was the ultimate act of leadership. And as the first light of a new day bathed the city in gentle gold, they embraced the promise of a future where love, in all its unpredictable splendor, reigned supreme.